Ever feel like you're stuck, in the shadow of your past?
Mm-hmm.
Like those old experiences, good or bad, are somehow calling the shots in your life. Like they are in control.
Yeah.
Well, today's deep dive is going to flip that script. We're going to explore whether we're truly controlled by what's happened to us or if there's a more empowering way to look at things.
It's fascinating, isn't it? This idea that we might have more control over our relationship with the past than we think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really excited to unpack this. Our source material is a dialogue between a philosopher and a youth who's pretty skeptical about the whole idea of not being defined by his past. It's like they're wrestling with some pretty big questions about life choices and perspective. And honestly, who hasn't felt that push and pull at some point?
Right, and what's interesting is how the philosopher uses the simple example of a parental divorce to illustrate his point.
Okay.
He says that while the event itself is objective, like the temperature of well water, the way we feel about it,
Right.
the meaning we give it is what truly shapes our present experience.
So two people could go through the same divorce, but because of how they process it, how they resolved it emotionally, they could end up in totally different places years later.
Exactly. One person might carry that experience as a heavy weight, letting it define their future relationships. Another might see it as a catalyst for growth, maybe even as a source of resilience. It all comes down to how they resolve that experience internally.
Okay, so it's not just about what happened. It's more about how did you deal with what happened.
Right.
I'm starting to see how this shifts things. But if the past doesn't define us, does that mean we actually have the power to change? I mean, is this some abstract philosophical concept, or does it line up with anything in psychology?
Well, there's a concept called teleology that aligns really well with this idea.
Okay.
It emphasizes the importance of future goals and aspirations, moving towards something you want rather than being driven by what happened in the past.
I'm grappling with this idea of teleology. It feels a bit abstract to me. Are there any real-life examples of how it works?
Absolutely. Think about someone who decides to quit smoking. They might have a long history of failed attempts, but this time they focus on their future health and the vision of themselves as a non-smoker. That future goal becomes their driving force, and even though they have this past of relapses, it doesn't dictate their present actions. They're not ignoring their past, but they're choosing to focus on a different future.
So it's like instead of being chained to our past, we can choose a different past, a different future. That's pretty different from, say, the Freudian idea that childhood trauma shapes us forever.
Exactly. Teleology says we can choose a different path. And while Freudian etiology, the idea that our childhood experiences significantly influence our adult personalities might be relevant.
Right.
It's not the whole story.
But going back to the dialogue, the youth is still pretty skeptical about all this, right? He's surrounded by books and manuscripts in the philosopher's study, like the weight of tradition is bearing down on him. He's wrestling with this idea of change. So is this really just a philosophical debate, or does it have real-world implications for us?
It's definitely both. It's a fascinating philosophical discussion, but it also has huge implications for how we live our lives. If we believe we're capable of change, we open up so many possibilities for personal growth. We break free from those self-limiting beliefs that might be rooted in the past. It can be a powerful shift.
I love this idea of being surrounded by all those books representing all that traditional thinking. But then having the philosopher offer this totally different way of seeing things, it makes you wonder what stands out to you in this conversation. What resonates with you when you think about your own relationship with the past?
What really strikes me is the emphasis on the subjective meaning we give to past events. It's not about pretending something didn't happen or minimizing pain or trauma. It's about recognizing that we have a choice in how we interpret those events.
So we're not just passive recipients of our past. We actively create the meaning and the narrative we carry with us.
Exactly. And if we can even slightly change that narrative, it can have a huge impact on how we experience the present. What's fascinating is this isn't just some abstract philosophical concept. It has practical applications for therapy, personal growth, and even our relationships. If we believe we can change, we're more likely to try new things, challenge ourselves, and break free from those self-limiting beliefs rooted in the past.
So instead of being defined by our past, we can use it as information, a stepping stone to becoming who we want to be. That's a powerful shift in perspective. But isn't it a bit idealistic to say we can just reframe any past experience? What about deeply traumatic events? Can we really choose to see those in a positive light?
That's a great question, and it's important to acknowledge that reframing isn't about denying the reality of difficult experiences or forcing ourselves to see them as positive.
Right.
It's about recognizing that even in the darkest of times, we can still find meaning, learn valuable lessons, and use those experiences to fuel our growth.
Okay, so maybe it's not about finding the positive, but about finding the meaning, the takeaway, even if it's hard.
Precisely. It's about shifting from this happened to me to this happened and I learned from it. It might take time, professional guidance, and a lot of inner work, especially with trauma, but the potential for healing and growth is there. It's about acknowledging the event, but choosing to focus on what we can control our present actions and future aspirations.
That makes sense. It's not about erasing the past, but integrating it into our understanding of ourselves and using it to grow. Here's where things get really interesting for me. What if we take this a step further? What if we could actually go back and reframe some of those past experiences and not change what happened, but change how we see them, how we understand them?
That's a really powerful question. It gets to the heart of agency and choice. If we can reframe our past, we're reclaiming power over it. We're saying, yes, this happened, but it doesn't define me. I choose how it shapes me.
This idea of reclaiming the narrative of our own lives really resonates with me. It's like instead of being victims of our past, we become authors of our own stories.
Exactly. And that's where real transformation happens. When we shift from a fixed mindset where we believe we're stuck with who we are and what we've experienced to a growth mindset where we believe in our capacity for change and evolution, it opens us up to a whole world of possibilities.
We've explored this idea that our interpretations of events matter more than the events themselves, and that we have the power to reframe our experiences in a way that empowers us. What does this all mean for us as we navigate life?
The key takeaway is that we have more control over our present and future than we might realize. Our past experiences are part of who we are, but they don't have to dictate our destiny. By consciously choosing how we interpret those experiences and focusing on our present actions and future goals, we can break free from the limitations of a past-determined perspective.
So we're not just passive passengers on the train of life, blindly following the tracks laid down by our past.
Not at all. It's more like we're the conductors. We have the power to choose our destination and even change the route along the way.
Okay, I love that analogy. It's like we're holding the map and we can choose which path to take. We can learn from those twists and turns of the past, but we're not bound by them.
Exactly. That's where the true freedom lies. It's not about erasing the past or pretending it didn't happen. It's about integrating it into our present understanding of ourselves and using it as fuel for growth.
It's funny. We started this deep dive talking about how it can feel like our past is controlling us. But now we're talking about freedom and choice. It's a pretty amazing shift.
It really is. And it all comes back to that idea of reframing. Choosing to see our past experiences not as chains that bind us, but as potential stepping stones on our journey of growth and transformation.
We've covered a lot of ground here. The power of perspective, the importance of reframing, and the idea that we're not defined by what's happened to us. But I want to leave our listener with something concrete, something they can actually do to apply these ideas to their own lives.
Right. I love that. How about this? If you could reframe one past experience in a way that empowers you today, what would it be? What new meaning could you give it that would shift your perspective on what's possible for you?
That's a great question to sit with. It invites us to look back with fresh eyes and see those past events, not as things that hold us back, but as potential stepping stones on our journey of growth. So as you go about your day, think about that question. What past experience, when reframed, could become a source of strength, wisdom, and inspiration for you? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.